Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to all of you. Is anybody back with us today for the first time? Okay, a pretty good number of you. Well, welcome back. It's great to have you with us. And I sure hope that you feel the same joy receiving the Eucharist today that your fellow parishioners did last week. Today we're celebrating the feast day of our parish, the Solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, even though in most other churches today they're celebrating the 12th Sunday of Ordinary Time. Technically this feast was this past Friday, but when it's the feast day of your parish, you're allowed to celebrate it on Sunday so that more parishioners can be present than would normally be there during the week. So I decided to celebrate the Solemnity of the Sacred Heart this weekend. So happy feast day of our parish to all of you. And today, of course, is also Father's Day. Do we happen to have any fathers out there with us this afternoon? All right, happy Father's Day to all of you. How about a round of applause for our dads? You know, you fathers have a very important job. You have to reveal the face of God the Father to your children. That means that when your kids look at you, they're supposed to see God the Father in you. And that's no small task. So this afternoon we pray in a special way for all of you fathers out there that you might be the best dads you can be, and that your children may always see a reflection of God the Father in you. And I'd like to say, if I could, a personal Happy Father's Day to my dad, who's with us right now. Dad, could you wave? Happy Father's Day, Dad. I definitely see the face of God the Father in you. Thank you for mirroring him for me. Thank you. Well, you know, Joe, Father's Day is a really special day for us priests also. You know, we don't have biological children, but we do consider ourselves spiritual fathers. And we have the great honor of being called father by the people that we serve. And that's a real honor. I know of a nun who used to say that men should be ordained as monsignors and have to earn the title father, not the other way around. And I agree with her. It's a great privilege and a great responsibility to be called father, and we priests certainly don't take that lightly. And while I'm on this topic, I don't want to make this about me at all, but I just want to let you know that I got a letter in the mail the other day from Cardinal Dolan appointing me pastor of Sacred Heart as of July 1st of this year. Thanks. Thanks. I know that some of you are probably thinking, isn't he already the pastor? Well, technically, no. Technically, I've been the administrator for the past year. So when you've never been a pastor before, they always make you administrator for a year first. It's kind of like a year of probation. You have all the responsibilities of pastor, but you don't have the title yet because they want to see how you do. And then once they give you the title, it's much harder for them to move you away before your term is up. So essentially what the letter means is that I didn't mess things up so badly in my first year that they had to send me away. And that means that you're stuck with me for the next couple of years. Good. I'm glad you're happy about that, because I am overjoyed to be stuck with all of you. This afternoon I'd like to make a connection between Father's Day and the Solemnity of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. There's a little experiment that they sometimes do at Christian seminars or workshops or retreats. They give you a piece of paper and a pen, and they tell you to write down 4 adjectives to describe your father. After you do that, they tell you to turn the piece of paper over, and then they move on to some other topic or some other activity to distract you for a little bit. Once you've been distracted long enough to forget what you wrote on the front side of the piece of paper, they ask you to write down 4 adjectives to describe God on the back side of the piece of paper. What they found in doing this experiment with many, many people is that the vast majority of people tend to end up with at least 2 of the same adjectives on both lists. So most people will use at least 2 of the same adjectives to describe their father as they use to describe God. Now, you don't have to be a psychologist to figure out what that means. It means that most people's understanding of God is deeply connected to the experience they have of their own earthly fathers. So if a person's father is good and loving and merciful, that person is much more likely to think of God as good and loving and merciful. But if a person's father is excessively critical or abusive or never around, the person's more likely to attribute those qualities to God. And when that happens, a person can develop a distorted image of God. And that just goes to show all of you dads out there how extremely important you are for the future faith life of your children. The way you are with your kids can have a really big impact on the way that your kids grow up to think about God. So our words and our actions as dads are really, really important. They are not without consequence by any means. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are walking around out there today with distorted images of God. A lot of people think of God as angry or vengeful or vindictive. They think of God as a stern authority figure who takes pleasure in punishing people and getting even with people. You'll even hear some people who are going through tough times say, God must be punishing me for the sins of my past. Ever heard somebody say that? Well, I got news for you. If you think of God as a big tyrant in the sky, looking to zap you whenever you mess up, you, my friend, have a distorted image of God. You might have picked that image up from the way your father was, or from the way you were taught about God in religion class when you were a kid, or from the way someone in authority spoke about God in front of you. Let me give you a little example. I can remember my mother telling us about a time when she made a retreat in high school, and she brought a blender with her on the retreat, which apparently you weren't supposed to do. A nun who was supervising saw the blender and actually said to my mom, Kathleen, the wrath of God will get you. All because of a blender. Thankfully, I don't think it affected my mom's image of God all that much. Right, Mom? It didn't, really. Right? But what kind of image is a person supposed to pick up if they hear people in positions of authority say things like that, especially when they're little? When you hear things like that as a kid, you can grow up to have a very distorted image of God. The correct image of God, the one that we're supposed to have, is the one we heard in our scripture readings today. Listen to this description of God from our psalm today. The Lord is kind and merciful, slow to anger, and rich in compassion. That's from the Old Testament. But it's a pretty far cry from the angry, wrathful judge that so many people think of when they think of God. In our second reading, St. John makes it so simple that a kindergartner could understand it. He puts it in 3 simple words. God is love. God doesn't just love, God is love. And yet so many people struggle to believe that because they are slaves to their distorted images of God. Now, what does all that have to do with the Sacred Heart of Jesus? Well, can anyone here tell me the name of the nun who had the visions of the Sacred Heart of Jesus? Who? Margaret Mary. Every parishioner of Sacred Heart should know that name. St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. She lived back in the 1600s, and the people of her time had all sorts of distorted images of God. At the time when she lived, there was a heresy going around called Jansenism, and Jansenism taught people about a God who was primarily a God of justice and wrath, not a God of love and mercy. And that idea got such a firm grip on people that they became terrified of God. Many people wouldn't even go up for communion because they were convinced that they were so unworthy and God was so exacting that he would punish them if they dared to receive the Eucharist. And in the midst of all that, Jesus appeared to a 26-year-old nun, St. Margaret Mary, in a convent in France on December 27th, 1673. And that over there is exactly what she saw, except that it wasn't a statue. It was really Jesus. She could see his heart, and out of his heart were coming flames of fire, representing the fire of God's love. Jesus pointed to his heart, and he said, "Behold the heart which has so loved men that it has spared nothing, even to exhausting and consuming itself in order to testify its love." And then in a series of visions, Jesus told Margaret Mary to tell the people of her time about the deep, unconditional, burning love of God. He told her about a God who loves us just the way we are, despite all the mistakes we've made in the past and all the sins we still struggle with in the present. And he told her about a God whose mercy is so great that it can forgive any sin, no matter how big. And he didn't just say all of that in words, but he gave her an image for people to look at to be reminded of his message. And that image is the Sacred Heart. So every time we see the Sacred Heart, the first thing we should think of is the burning, unconditional love of God for us. That message was a message that the people of St. Margaret Mary's time desperately needed to hear, and it's one that the people of our time desperately need to hear too. If we don't get rid of our distorted images of God, they can prevent us from having the deep, intimate relationship with God that God so badly wants us to have with him. So this afternoon, I'd like to invite you all to take a deep look inside yourselves and ask yourselves if by any chance you are carrying around any distorted images of God. Even if you think you aren't, are there perhaps even any small traces or vestiges of a distorted image of God that you might have picked up somewhere over the years? If so, God really wants to set you free from them once and for all. And the Feast of the Sacred Heart is an invitation to be liberated from our distorted images of God. So if you've got any swimming around in there, when you receive communion today, ask Jesus for the grace to be set free from your distorted images of God. And be sure that he will grant you that grace. No one wants you to believe in his love more than he does. Because once you encounter his love, your life is never the same again.